Hello and welcome to another video review. This is King of Dragon Pass for PC, Mac, iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. This is a very interesting hybrid of turn-based strategy and role-playing elements that was developed by A# LLC and originally released in 1999 for PC and Mac. You later saw a re-release on iOS in 2011, and of course it got ported to Android and Windows Phone as well. It's interesting to note that the phone versions, the Android, iOS, and Windows Phone versions, are all the updated version with more content in them and some tooltips, hints, that sort of thing. Whereas the version that's still available for PC is the original release of the game, and that's what you're seeing in this video. So I can't actually speak for the iOS, Android, or Windows Phone versions. I'm only speaking for the PC version. But they're pretty much the same game. It's just that the newer versions of the game are obviously more modernized in terms of its interface. They're more user-friendly and that sort of thing. But the real question here is, how does this interesting hybrid work? Because it's something that you look at first glance and just go, well, this looks kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book. Of course, when you do look at this thing, it looks pretty bizarre for a video game. In fact, it doesn't really look all that much like a video game. You have a bunch of still images, some text, and that's really it. There's no animations at all. That said, the art is all hand-drawn, and it's drawn in the style of Glorantha, which is the game's setting. And it looks like you would expect if you had actually looked into the Glorantha setting. And so they've pretty much nailed that aesthetic. And it looks pretty good. The art can look a bit bizarre sometimes, but that's because they're going for that very specific style. And it works quite well. Despite there not really being any animations to speak of, the game doesn't really get all that boring in terms of its visuals. There's always something to feast your eyes upon. And pretty much everything in this game is very well laid out in terms of the interface as well. Very easy to navigate. The fonts in general are pretty easy to read. There are some when you get to the smaller text where you might have to pay more attention to it, but it's pretty much all fine. And the visuals, while very, very minimal, work rather well. Then there's the sound, which consists of ambient sounds, which work pretty well. They are pretty much exactly what you expect if you're doing various things. And the music, which is really, really good. It's got a great soundtrack that ranges between these wonderful tunes that just get you moving to these tunes that make you feel like something bad has happened or something bad is going to happen and you had to stave off disaster, and all sorts of great music that really does fit with the feel of what they're going for here. Plus, it has the most upbeat rating music I think I've ever heard, so it gains bonus points from that to some degree. But despite its fairly minimal presentation, it manages to hold a lot of charm for what it is. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is rooted in the Glorantha setting from what was known at the time as Hero Wars. You've also seen it as Hero Quest, or soon to be Rune Quest. And it's basically a tabletop role-playing game setting where at some point in the past the gods walked among men. So you have these gods like Orlanth, Ernalda, Urox, etc., who all walked among men, and during their age they were basically ushering in a golden age for the various clans of humans. And then chaos happened, and the gods ended up having to be put into stasis effectively, or risk dying at the forces of chaos. So horrible things ensued, and through a long series of events that it does describe in the game, you eventually get to this point where humans start to move out of their heartland because of this character called the Pharaoh, who basically invaded and pitted Orlanthi against Orlanthi, and the greatest sin an Orlanthi can commit is that of kinslaying. And so that was what was going on. So a lot of them left that area and moved to what is known as Dragon Pass. It's known as Dragon Pass because of events in the past where people moved there and found that, well, here be dragons, and that did not go well, to say the least. But that said, you're willing to brave the dangers of Dragon Pass in order to find a new life for your clan. And this is where the story really comes into play. After you go through the whole creation myth for your clan, where you decide who your patron god or goddess is, where you decide who you helped awaken first in terms of the gods and goddesses, who your sworn enemy is, and so on and so forth, you get to lead the clan to becoming a tribe and just lasting as long as you can. And there is a victory condition. I believe it's 10 years that you have to survive as the leader of a tribe. And so what ends up happening is that you go through a series of events as you progress through the game, and you try to build up your clan to greater and greater glory. And these events will just happen pretty much at random. There are a number of events that are available in the game. Over 100. I think it's actually a couple of hundred. And what ends up happening is you get presented with these events, and you get to choose the outcome. What does your clan do in this situation? For example, you get confronted with some warrior from another clan who is just angry at something that somebody in your clan has done. Well, what do? Do you chase him off? Do you acquiesce to his demands? Do you say that the person who he is angry at has to duel him? What do you do? And that's where the clan ring comes in. You have 7 members to your clan ring. They are basically nobles. And they each have their own opinions on things based on what god they worship and what their strengths and weaknesses are. For example, if you come across an event that's really heavily based in magic, you want to pay more attention to what your main magic user in the clan ring is going to say, rather than what, say, a hunter is going to say or a warrior is going to say, because they're not going to know as much. And so you'll find that you want a pretty balanced clan ring, and you can reorganize that as you need to. But the one thing you always want to do is have someone who is worshiping your patron deity at the head of the clan. If you don't, you lose magic. A lot of magic. Now, magic is given to you in points. You can spend these at the beginning of the sacred time, as they call it, before you go into the various seasons, which are your turns. And you can spend it in various areas. For example, trade, or war, or crops, or things like that, which are intended to help you out along the way, to give you better chances for things like, if you put it in a trade, for example, give you better chances of success when you're conducting trade missions or bargaining or that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that you don't really get to see, but influences the outcome of various situations. For example, you can actually choose the exact same options between events, and different outcomes will happen because of things that are going on behind the scenes. For example, you might have done an event prior to this that ties in and you just didn't know about it, whereas in a previous run in the game, you may have gotten that event without having the prior event, and so it had a different outcome. Or you might have been presented with something beforehand and it came out a certain way, and that is actually something that ties into another event later on down the line that you couldn't have possibly gotten otherwise. So, no two games are really alike in King of Dragon Pass. You're presented with a lot of different events as you go through, and so your clan's story actually ends up changing pretty dramatically as you go through. Will you be the clan that is seen as the wonderful clan of Dragon Pass that bring everybody together and that sort of thing? Or will you be the stick pickers? Will you just collapse into mediocrity? That all depends on you and what you choose. Now the strategy part comes in when you're doing things like trade or crops or hunting or things like that. You want to make sure that you can feed your clan. And so you need to make sure that your crops are in good order. You need to make sure that if you're doing a lot of hunting, then you need to make sure you have enough hunters and enough land to hunt on. You need to make sure that if you're doing crops, you've got enough cropland, that sort of thing. Or if you're doing cattle farming, which is actually pretty vital for the survival of your clan, because cattle is actually the main currency in the game. You have to keep in mind, this thing is effectively set in the Iron Age. There wasn't such a thing as currency, really. There were goods, or there were cattle, and you bartered for things. And so, that's something you learn very quickly. Even though you can apply modern principles to things like warfare, or to crops, or hunting, or things like that, and make sure that you've got those sorted out properly. Because you can go on raids to other clans too, and you can make sure that your defenses are all set up. All of this stuff would make sense even in a modern context. But because the game is centered around its setting of a sort of Iron Age Nordic mentality, you can't really think like a modern person. You have to think in terms of what an ancient people would do. An ancient, very superstitious people that deal with magic on a regular basis. You have to think in terms of your ancestors, because if you do something that goes against what your ancestors did, you lose magic points. It's not good. If you live up to what your ancestors did, then you gain magic points. And so all of this ties in. There's a lot of underlying complexity here, and that wildly different mentality can change things dramatically. Even if you don't really know anything about Iron Age culture, for example, you can pick up on things very quickly by how your clan ring is. For example, that if you come across an event that says, say, a woman ran away from her village because they wanted to marry her off to some guy and she didn't want to marry him. Well, a modern person might think, well, good for her, she's a strong-willed woman, she's a feminist, and so on and so forth. Well, in an Iron Age culture where marriages were arranged, that's not really a good thing. It's not really a negative thing either, it's just something that has to happen. And you can actually have some pretty big consequences from that if you don't handle the situation well. So, all of this comes into play, and there's a lot of things in the backstory that you pretty much have to pay attention to understand things. And then there's the whole building up your tribe and building up your magic and things like that. In order to find blessings from the gods, you have to actually make sacrifices to them, whether it be cattle or goods or even thralls, which are slaves if you don't know that. And you can actually go on raids and take thralls if you want to, or you can take people in as thralls, or you can take them in as adopted family, in which case if you ever take thralls or attempt to take thralls, it's not going to work out. And so you have to make sacrifices to the gods in order to gain access to their blessings, and then you can build temples or shrines to them and activate their blessings, which give you a continuous boost in certain areas. For example, there's a blessing that boosts crop yields, or there's a thing that boosts the effectiveness of your warriors and things like that. And sometimes they might give you secrets to a various mystery. Now, when you talk about the mysteries, you're talking about hero quests. At various points in the game, you can go on hero quests. Really, whenever you feel like you're ready, you can do one. But they are very difficult, and that you basically have somebody from your clan, usually on your clan ring, in fact, reenacting a sequence from legend. For example, with the one that actually is required to build up a tribe, you have to complete the making of the Storm Tribe hero quest. And so you need to have somebody, most likely your clan leader, complete this quest and ask for the blessing of tribe making in return for completing the quest successfully. And what this will do is it'll put you into an event like you've done before, but you have to follow the actual myth. So if you don't know the myth through, for example, just not knowing the full mysteries through having done a lot of sacrificing and things like that, then you're going to have a much harder time than somebody who actually knows the myth. So, you go through this whole thing, and if you manage to complete the hero quest successfully, you can get a very large bonus, whether it be blessing for tribes, or you get a huge boost to whatever your character who completed the quests, or any number of other things. You can ask for an artifact of some sort, a treasure, things like that. And so all of this ties in together with the whole game. You have to do hero quests to be able to complete the game. You have to do the making of the Storm Tribe, and I believe you have to do at least one other hero quest to actually be able to win the game, in addition to having to wait the required amount of years in-game. Each year is made up of numerous seasons. You have Sea Season, which is planting season. You have Earth Season, which is basically harvesting season. Fire Season, where nothing's really happening, so most people just go on raids. Dark Season, which is winter, the deep winter. And Storm Season, which you can basically say is a mixture of fall and winter. And each of these seasons have different effects on different things. For example, in Dark Season, you can't really get all that much done. You might be able to build something or do sacrifices, but you can't actually do much anything else. And you have 2 actions per turn. You have to use those wisely. And events will happen that will take up your actions in a turn. So there's a lot of various things that go into this game, and at first it sounds like it may not be that interesting. But when you actually get into the meat of it, it's a very interesting game. And after a while of playing it, you start to really understand how everything fits together. Although, for the life of me, I still can't really understand the battle system. They describe it, if you look up the actual mechanics, as the actions you take, for example, plunder or kill as many as possible as your objective, and then the tactics you use, like skirmish or charge or evade. Though that specific combination is supposed to be more effective against certain other combinations than others, and so the game basically randomly generates what the enemy is going to be doing. And so there's a lot of random chance in that, and the outcomes can be either just disastrous or really, really good, and you're not entirely sure why. But that's really only on the battle system. When you're actually in the meat of the game, doing the events, there's not a huge amount of the random chance, and so it's stuff that basically makes sense. You do have some random chance, but there is a lot of predictability with it, with regards to, well, if I do this, then this is probably going to happen, and sure enough, it ends up happening. But like I said, the battle system's kind of infuriating, actually, because of that whole random chance thing, and you're not entirely sure whether something's going to work or not. So, ultimately, King of Dragon Pass ends up being a very unique game. It's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure, and that's where the role-playing elements come in very, very big. But at the same time, it's a strategy game. You are trying to lead your clan to victory, and to do so, you have to engage in a lot of strategic planning. You have to have the right people on your clan ring for the job. You have to make the best out of a bad situation, because most of the situations you're going to be in are pretty bad. You're pretty much just newcomers here. You're not really established and have good fortifications or anything like that, at least not from the start. And so, you're going to feel like a fish out of water sometimes. But the game ends up being a very unique experience that's actually a lot of fun to play. And it has a lot of charm about it that makes it well worth your time to pick up. Particularly if you just look at this thing and think, well, it looks like it could be cool. It looks interesting. It looks unusual. And so, I can really do nothing but recommend King of Dragon Pass. Unless, of course, you just don't like a lot of reading because, well, there's a lot of reading in the game. But other than that, it's a very interesting game. Well worth your time. Thanks for watching.